Talk about habits this morning. There's a guy that owned his own plane, had out in the country, a lake home. He'd kind of fly into the airport up there, and he'd have to keep a vehicle at the airport that he could drive back and forth from the little airport out to his lake place and back. And so he just had an idea one day, and he's like, you know what? I don't need to do this. I don't need to keep that other whole vehicle up there. Well, I don't need, I'll equip my plane with pontoons, and then I can just land on the lake and taxi right up to the dock, and I don't have to have this other vehicle. So he thought, wow, that's a great idea. So he did it, and went through the training stuff that he needed for landing on a lake, because that's a whole different dynamic. But on his first trip out to the lake home in his newly equipped plane, he and his wife were sitting there visiting and just talking. And out of habit, he headed for a landing at the airport, just like he had always done in the past. Old habits are hard to break. And he was just getting ready to come in for the landing, and him and his wife were sitting there having a conversation. It was all of a sudden dawned on his wife what he was doing, and he hollered, you can't do that. You don't even have wheels on this thing. You can't land on the runway. And just last moment, man, he pulled the stick back and pulled the plane back up. He's like, her warning came just in time. Swung the plane around, headed out for a landing on the lake. Picture perfect landing on the lake. He heaved a big sigh of relief, turned to his wife and said, that is about the stupidest thing I've ever done. He turned, he opened the door, he stepped out and fell directly into the lake. Habits are hard to break. But understand this, please, too. When I first put this screen up, don't say it out loud, okay? Do not say it out loud. But I'm just wondering, what came to your mind when I put this screen up? Because most of the time, when we think of habits, we immediately think of bad habits. But not all habits are bad. Let's talk about it for a moment. What are some good habits? What are some good habits? Okay, prayer's a good habit. Reading the Word, okay? Brushing your teeth. Everybody around you appreciate it when you have that habit, okay? That's a good habit. Okay, fellowshipping together. Others, what are some good habits? Okay, shall we? I'm hearing several things through. Isn't it kind of wild that we got to kind of think? Okay, we're waving at people. Why is it we struggle sometimes with listing good habits? Because not all habits are bad. Now, a primary way to keep out bad habits is to form good habits. Like the habit of being thankful. Habit? Yeah. Or should be. We think, well, why should we be thankful? Here's the reality, church. It's not for God's benefit. Really, it's for our benefit. And so for the next little bit this morning, I want to talk of some of the values of the habit of being thankful. Now, I'm going to just give a disclaimer here. This isn't my outline. I'm borrowing this outline. Every once in a while as a pastor, I'll see something, someone will come across my desk, and I look at them like, dude, that'll preach. Or as one friend of mine used to say, that dog will hunt. So it's like, okay, put it away. And so I'm borrowing this outline for us this morning because it just, I think, really explains it in some great ways. So what are the values of the habit of being thankful? First of all, thankfulness tends to halt complaining. It's hard to be thankful and to complain at the same time. That's just, yep. Unfortunately, for most, it's easier to complain than it is to be thankful. So developing the habit of thankfulness helps us combating complaining. In James chapter 3, verses 10 and 11, we read this: out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? Nope. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. No. That's why what we are in church on Sunday needs to be who we are at work on Monday. Or even with our families at 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon when we're watching the Vikings lose. Okay. Did I say, I'm sorry, I said that out loud. Okay. We need to be out of the same mouth come praise and cursing? No. Are we thankful? Now, let me just ask you this, and again, I'm not looking for a verbal answer. I want you to just think about this. Yourself. When you think about yourself, would you say maybe that when others look at you, they would identify you as a thankful person or as a complainer? Now, I know in my wide circle, I know some people who are complainers. And in all honesty, I minimize contact with them. Don't you? There are certain people that I have learned the hard way. Don't ever ask them that common greeting that we use so often, how you doing? Because if you ask them, they are going to tell you. And you're going to be there for the next hour listening to every malady, ache, and pain that they have had for the last 22 and a half years, And so I've just learned some people, I'll say, hi, but I'm not asking the question, how are you? Because I really don't want to go there, okay? But when people look at us, when people look at you, what do they see? A person who is thankful or a complainer? Now, we're the ones that can answer that. Now, sometimes, and I will even throw this challenge out to you today, those that are in your closest circle, ask them. Your family, spouse, even kids, those that are your close, maybe coworker or neighbor or whatever, ask them. Because we can get so caught up in complaining, we don't even notice it when we do it. And so sometimes we may need some outside intervention. You know what I'm saying? Somebody, kind of like, well, you asked, so don't ask unless you're willing to hear the answer, all right? But, you asked, and yeah, you do kind of complain quite a bit. Oh. But that then gives us a place where we can begin to bring change into our lives. But here's another thought. When sometimes we're around people that are complainers that we can't do anything about, okay? Work, family. Sometimes we're just around people that complain. But try this. When they start complaining, you start giving thanks. And a lot of times, it will shut down the complaining. If we counter their complaining with giving thanks. Okay, let's look at another value of being thankful. Thankfulness tends to enhance enjoyment. When we receive a gift, our thankfulness helps to enjoy it more. I have seen some things recently, and one of them I just happened to see in the last week, that said one of the things kind of culturally that they've seen that they thought was not good was thank you notes are disappearing. And even after weddings, this particular one happened to be after a wedding, birthdays, anniversaries, things like that, and gifts. And yeah, we're not sending out any thank yous. And not even really an acknowledgement about those. And they said, culturally, that's really not a good direction for us. And then when on the receiving end, our thankfulness helps to enjoy it more. We've got to get away from this entitlement mentality and just be thankful for what somebody has blessed us with, for what God has blessed us with, for what others have blessed us with. God has given us great gifts. John chapter 10, verse 10, amazing verse. The thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus said, my purpose is to give life in all its fullness. I know people that are existing, but they're not living. And there's a difference. Do you want to enjoy life more, this life in all its fullness? How thankful are you? Next one, next value. Thankfulness tends to soothe distress. I've heard those terms, Blue Mondays, depressed, down. Try being thankful. Oh yeah, pastors even go through this. It has long been said to pastors, don't ever resign on a Monday. Oh yeah, that's accurate. Why? Because just that sometimes things didn't always go well on Sundays. So, and I know some pastors that are resigned on Mondays to regret it. Now, when we're talking about this, as far as the depression and some of those things, I'm not talking here about clinical depression. And I know that's a real dynamic. But I also know there's a lot of people walking around our culture that claim to have depression that are self-diagnosed. I'm not talking about that. Okay? Try being thankful. So often, we focus on our problems instead of on the God who can handle our problems. And what happens with what we focus on? It becomes bigger. Number of years ago, I took a photography class. And it was in Minnesota. So one of the dynamics they taught in the photography class is how to take a picture with somebody with a fish, okay, when they've caught a fish, and how to do it. Because there's a trick to that. When you look at the pros, there is a trick to that, because they show you how you can take a picture of that so that the fish is in the foreground. The fish is what's in the focus, and make that fish really look bigger than it really is. All in the way the picture was taken. Sometimes we do that with our problems. I don't really use it anymore with our digital age, and now how we use these things for taking pictures and all that stuff. But I used to have, well, I think I still have it somewhere, my old 35 millimeter SLR single lens reflex camera. And I know some still do this now with the digital age, but I don't do enough pictures to justify the cost of one of those units. But okay. But you have to focus, right? This stuff here is all pretty much automatic focus. But those, most of them, it's a manual focus. And so you got to bring into focus what you want to focus on and let the rest kind of disappear into the background. So often we focus on our problem. And so our problem becomes bigger and bigger and bigger because that's what we're focusing on. And when we do that, God becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. But when we focus on God, our God becomes bigger. And our problems, it's not like they're not there, but they become smaller. And we do it in thankfulness. We realize God has handled my business in the past. He can handle my present business. And he can handle any future business I'm going to look at because I know he's always been faithful in handling my business in the past. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus said, "Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life?" Does worrying do that? Nope. In fact, we have now seen in studies, a large number of studies and research have shown us that worrying takes hours away from our lives. Worrying can bring about all kinds of physical dynamics that shorten our lives. So he's like, so why are you going to worry about it? Now, we'll come back to response to that in a moment. Okay? Another value is that thankfulness tends to destroy anxiety. Now, this is a little bit similar to the last one, but different as well. You see, anxiety is more than worry. Anxiety is fear. And again, we have so many people walking around our world today that suffer from anxiety. Now, again, I am not talking about clinical anxiety. I am, self-diagnosed anxiety is right in here, okay? Because again, a lot of them say, oh, you have a diagnosis? Well, no, okay, then it's self-diagnosed. How often do the things we fear happen? Not very often, is it? I mean, so many things that we worry about, we have fear about, they so rarely happen. But anxiety is this level of fear. And right now, fear is a huge challenge in our culture today. In fact, I would really describe a large part of our particular American culture today as a fear culture. People that are living in fear, reacting out of fear. I mean, it's just their whole life is fear. And especially since the end of 2019, when all the COVID stuff started to come in, boy, that really ramped it up. But even since then, I mean, I know so many people that just outright live in fear. So where does fear come from? Okay, let's look at a couple verses here. Philippians 4:6. He says, do not be anxious about anything. Well, look at there. He actually used the word. Anxiety, anxious. He said, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Believe it or not, most of the time, there is a method to my madness, okay? Why is it a lot of Sunday mornings we quote these verses? Philippians 4, 6 through 8. Because if we quote them enough, you remember them. And so when those moments hit you, you can use this as ammunition to defeat it. When those moments of anxiety hit, don't be anxious about anything. He said, now that's a pretty broad subject. But he's like, don't fear. But, so how do we counter that? In everything, by prayer and petition, notice this, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. You know, as a believer, my thought is, why worry when I can pray? But for so many, the thought is, why pray when I can worry? What does worry get us? Worry doesn't get us anywhere. But if I take it to God, and then notice verse 7 here. Then, and after I've done that, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So, transcends all understanding. What does that mean? It means I can't explain this. I got this thing I'm facing in my life. In 2020, March 23rd, 2020, I sat in a doctor's office and heard him tell me these words. You have cancer. Okay? Easy to get caught up in the fear. You hear that C word? Oh my goodness. I'll be honest, I don't know that I heard a lot more what he said after that. I mean, just you hear that C word and you go into a tailspin. Sherry was with me. We left his office, sat in the front seat of the car, and we just looked at each other and said, God's got this. God's got this. Because we take it to God in prayer. With thanksgiving, again, remembering everything he's already done. All that leading up to the faith that I can walk in today. And so there's this peace of God and all through that process. And cancer in the midst of COVID. Because I got my diagnosis March 23rd. March 19th, the governor shut the state down. Okay? So, I mean, I having to battle that thing through, you know, the midst of the COVID and the incredible rampant fear that just took over our culture. And we walked in peace through the whole thing. Even when I got a bill for $110,000. God took care of it. We walked in peace through the whole thing. You want that peace? But you see, that peace doesn't come if we hang on to the anxiety. If we hang on to the fear. In fact, I don't often do this, but I'm going to say this morning. If you're one of those that's self-diagnosed with anxiety, stop saying that. Stop saying that. That's a false statement. Now again, if you've got a clinical diagnosis, that's not what I'm talking about. But if it's that self-diagnosis, stop describing yourself that way. Instead of, in those moments, instead of saying, I have anxiety, say, God, you got this. Here's what Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So again, where does this fear come from? It's not coming from God. from Satan, from the world. I'll talk about this again more. From our media, and there maybe from some people in our lives. And okay, shut it down. God has not given us the spirit of fear. What has he given us? Power, love, and what? Sound mind. So, here's a challenge for you. If you're one of those that's really struggling at times with anxiety, memorize 2 Timothy 1:7. Memorize this. And when that feeling begins to come, that fear begins to come up, quote this to yourself. Even if you have to quote it to yourself 847 times, just keep quoting it. Put it on a loop in your mind. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. And that is what I'm going to claim. He said in Philippians 4:6, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving. We prevent or handle maybe anxiety by prayer in our lives as to today and the future with thanksgiving for the past. I'm not going to live in fear. I'm not going to live in that fear. Maybe we need to separate ourselves from some of the things that spark fear in our lives. Like the news. If you kind of got, whatever news channel, just kind of on the loop in your home, yeah, guess what? I can almost guarantee you're going to live in fear. Because that's what they're about. That's what gets them clicks. I watched an interview earlier this week with some media people, somebody who had used to work for one of the major news sources, and they said it's all about, it's not the print media. Their whole focus was not about the print media, was not even about the television broadcast media. It was all about the online media, and everything is designed to get clicks. Everything was designed to get likes. And the more fear, the more clicks they get. And this is somebody in media that was saying this. Okay? So if this is where you're at, and even you got all this stuff on your phone, and we can't even get away from it now. You got all this stuff on your phone and all this. Start separating yourself from it. Get rid of those apps. I've been working on some things on my computer, that one right there, because so many of these places now, and I hate it every time they do an update. Yay, Microsoft. Every time they do an update, they reset it back. So every time they do an update, I got to go back. I'm sick and tired of every time I click on a search engine, it comes up to news. And I don't want it. I don't need that in my life. Most of it doesn't impact me anyway. But I don't need that in my life. I'm clicked on there because I'm going to look something up, so just bring me up to the search engine. There's one I have found, just so you know, there's one I found that doesn't do that. DuckDuckGo it doesn't take me to a news site. But so many, all about the news site. Why? Because they got to keep you hooked and keep you living in fear. So separate from it, okay? Because thankfulness tends to destroy anxiety. Another value, thankfulness tends to deepen repentance. Thankfulness reminds us of where we would be without Jesus. Do you ever stop to think about where you would be without Jesus? Do you ever do that? Now, I'll say this a couple of times here. It's not, we don't want to live there, okay? We don't want to live in our past, all right? But time to time, Just thinking about where you would be without Jesus. Here's what I can tell you. All of my closest friends in high school are all dead because they took their own lives. Every one of my closest friends from high school. So, and the saying out there is, show me your friends, and I'll show you you. Okay, so that's a terrifying thought for me. Okay, do you ever stop where you would be without Christ? And it was actually when I came into right relationship with Christ that separated me from those friends, because I no longer did what we used to do. So we grew apart. Hallelujah. Isaiah said this in Isaiah 51, verse 1. Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness, you who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug. What is he saying there? He's saying, don't totally disassociate yourself from where God has brought you from. I know what my life was like BC, before Christ. Okay. And the AD, yeah, after death, because it tells us to crucify ourselves. So, okay, there's my defining moment right there. But at times, to remember where God has brought us from. Paul put it this way in Romans 2:4, or do you show contempt for the riches of his kindness, tolerance, and patience, not realizing that God's kindness leads you toward repentance? When I see where God has brought me from, oh, that'll develop a thankful heart. It's been a while back. I attended our high school reunion. I don't know, Sherry and I, we haven't started getting stuff yet. I don't know if I should even say this. Yeah. Next year's our 50th. 50th reunion. So I know our classes, I'm sure they're going to be doing something. So we just haven't heard what it is yet as to whether we're going to take any of that in or not. I don't know. But the last class reunion I went to a few years ago, they did something really interesting. I loved what they did. They did an all-school class reunion. So it wasn't just the kids from my class. It was the year before, the year after, other kids that we knew and were friends while we were in school together. Oh, my goodness. Some of them looked really, really rough. And I wasn't really surprised, just from the life that they've lived. When I see where God has brought me from, wow, it just develops a thankful heart. Again, our past isn't where we want to live. I want to live in all that from the past. But to remember where God has brought us from. By the way, I also want to say, I almost every time I go back to Montana now, I meet with another classmate. We weren't friends, really. I mean, we knew each other. I wouldn't have said we were really good friends when I was in school. But we have developed a friendship over these last number of years. He has a love for the Lord. At one point, he actually listed our church as his home church because he watched us a lot on Facebook. And just through a lot of dynamics in his life, he's like, hey, man, I'm part of your church now. I'm like, awesome. And I see some things now on Facebook from some other classmates that, wow, you're walking with Jesus now? But you know what? They would say the same thing about me. Well, you're walking with Jesus now? when I was back on staff at a church in my hometown in Laurel, Montana, and our ministerial, actually, I don't know why, but they elected me to be the ministerial president. And so one day I was meeting with some of our high school officials who, it was the same high school principal that was my high school principal. And I remember one day when we were in some conversation about it, he just looked at me and said, oh, you're that Paul Peterson. Some things we end up living down. But when we think about the past and where God has brought us from, thankfulness brightens hope. Well, there we go. One of the things our world is sorely lacking in is hope. We live in a culture that's just so entrenched in hopelessness. It's one of the reasons why the suicide rates are what they are. Just the hopelessness that people live in. We look back thankful for God's mercy, and so we look forward with even more hope. We talked about people living in fear. One of the things that people fear is the future. And they just live in fear of that. But here's God is faithful. In Romans 5:5, here's what he said. Hope does not disappoint us because God has poured out his love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit whom he has given us. So here we go. We're tied this in now. This whole thing is still tied in with our Pentecostal perspective series on the Holy Spirit. Hope does not disappoint us. This habit of thankfulness helps keep us grounded in who God is and his work in our life. And so the future does not look bleak and hopeless. The future is filled with hope because of who God is. And one final value this morning, thankfulness helps strengthen us for endurance. Now, I'll tell you, I'm not sure I like that last word. That whole, that endurance thing, okay? Because to say endurance means I'm going through something that I got to endure. Okay, so it's like, okay, I'm not sure I really like that word, but it is the reality, isn't it? Thankfulness helps strengthen us for endurance. We work more effectively when we work cheerfully, when we work in thankfulness. Paul writes in Colossians 1, verses 11 and 12, being strengthened with all power. Now, this is what Paul was praying for this church in Colossae. And he's praying that they would be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you might have great endurance and patience and joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the kingdom of light. In that statement, we find three crazy words all listed in the same statement. Endurance, patience, joyfully. Words that don't necessarily always go together. But he's telling that church, I want you to have great endurance and patience. And they were going through some hard things in that church and in that culture, in that part of the world. Difficult days they were facing. But he said, I pray that God's glorious, the might of his presence will give you great endurance and patience. And then what? Joyfully giving thanks to the Father. Because in the midst of whatever they were going through, God had not checked out. He was still there. The habit of thankfulness. There was a conductor on the Santa Fe Railroad, this is a bunch of years ago. And this conductor gave his life to Christ, joined a church. After he had been faithful there for a while, He was asked one Sunday morning to help take up the offering. He started down the aisle, passing the offering plate along, and everything went well until he came to a very richly well-dressed lady. And she just kind of took the plate and handed it on by, and he slipped into his conductor mode for a moment by habit. And he reached up to pull the bell rope to stop the train. And he said, "Ma'am, if you don't pay, you'll have to get off." Habits. That man had a habit. Are you developing the habit of being thankful? Now, I've been told, and studies have shown that, I'm not sure how they track all this, but they say basically it takes 30 days of regularly doing something to make or break a habit. Okay, so, this isn't like, I did it once, so okay, I got a new habit. No, it's 30 days, they said, of regularly doing something. Now, I've noticed some, and I've seen this in years past, and I've seen it again this year, what some people do in their social media pages through the month of November. Because how many days does November have? 30 days. And so there are some that every day through the month of November, they are posting something they are thankful for. And just developing that art of being thankful. What are you thankful for? Are we developing the habit of being thankful? Being thankful to those around us, like our family. Do we express thanks in our homes? For both Sherry and I, and we have worked on this throughout our years of marriage, and we're at over 47 now. And, but some things that we have worked into that relationship through these years. Okay, like the habit of being thankful and expressing it. Sit down to a meal, and since the kids are grown and out of the house now, we kind of do a little, and Sherry works outside the home some now and doesn't get home till later, so we've kind of split up sometimes the deal of meal preparation. But we both developed the habit, whoever did the meal, saying thanks. It wasn't just threw a frozen pizza in the oven, but even that, hey, thanks. Okay, but this habit of being thankful, just the normal everyday stuff, do we say thanks? Routinely, I will say, when I open one of my clothes drawers and there's clean clothes in there that I get to put on, I'll tell Sherry, hey, thanks for doing the laundry. That's kind of not my forte. So, hey, thanks for doing the laundry. There's a lot of days. She'll come in the house, hey, thanks for cleaning out the driveway, getting the snow off so she could get back in the garage. Just the normal, routine stuff. Do we express thanks? And we would do this. I'm going to walk into one of our kids' rooms. Whoa, you guys, man, thanks for cleaning up your room. I didn't even have to tell them. And it came in, the room's all cleaned up. Thank you. It's their room. It was my house. So thanks, and just some of those things, every opportunity we get, are we saying thankful? Thank you. What about the people we encounter throughout the week? When we're out to eat, for me, it's not just about leaving a tip on the table. And you know one of the really sad things? There's a lot of restaurants, who the servers say the worst time to work is the Sunday morning after church crowd, because they've said they are the worst tippers in the world. That is horrible. That is horrible. I don't want to be known for that. But for me, it's about more than just leaving a tip on the table. It's also about expressing thanks to the cooks. Sherry and I were little jaunt over to Atwater to see our granddaughter, whatever that was about, earlier this week. I don't know why we did that, but, went over. Well, on our way home, stopped at just a fast food place in Weimar to grab some lunch. But on our way out the door, and I try, depending on the setting, but I try to routinely do this. On my way out the door, I stop, turn on, and just kind of waved back in the kitchen, and I will loudly tell them, hey, thanks for serving me lunch today, as I'm on my way out the door. I've seen sometimes the look on their faces. Yes, this surprise. What? Just saying thank you. When I was growing up, my parents were camp cooks. They cooked at a lot of our Montana Assembly God district camps. And I remember one year, kids camp. And they were cooking camps long before I was able to go as a camper. In fact, my first experience at kids camp was in a little tiny snuggly my mom had on. I was less than 2 months old, and my mom was cooking. But I remember one day being in the kitchen, and I was too young to be a camper yet, and the speaker brought in a prize, gave it to my parents, and said, here, I want you to give this to the first camper that goes through the line that says thank you. So I'm sitting in there watching, because I'm thinking, hey, I hope nobody says thank you. Maybe I can get it. Mind of a kid. I was maybe, 5 or 6, something like that, So I'm watching. Second to the last kid. 125 campers. Second to the last kid was the first one to say thank you. That's sad. That's sad. The people around us, even the people that check us out at the grocery stores, people behind the counter at the convenience store. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, the people that are around us, just normal, daily, routine stuff. How often do we take the time to say thank you? And again, I have seen it on the looks on so many of their faces, and it's not, I'm still working at doing it more, okay? I've not perfected this by any means, okay? I'm still working at doing it more. But the look on their face when somebody says, hey, thank you for restocking the shelves. Are we developing the habit of being thankful? When we want to establish that habit, we just determine that we're going to do it every chance we get. And it's not just about the week of Thanksgiving. It's way beyond that. The more we are thankful, so part is developing with us, not just something we say, but in our own lives, this dynamic of being thankful, so that then it naturally comes out as we express it. Our thanks to God, and our thanks to the people in our lives. Let's stand together this morning.